Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, Cyber Liability, Cybersecurity Insurance, What You Need to Know. I'm Sarah Duffy, Marketing Manager here at Barracuda MSP, and I'm happy to be moderating today's session. Today, I am joined by Justin Rimas, CEO of TechRug. Before we get started, let's do some brief housekeeping. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, feel free to submit them in the questions panel to the right of the GoToWebinar screen. At the end of the webinar, you will be prompted to complete a brief survey. Please take a moment to tell us what you think, as we are continuously improving the content and quality of our online events. Now, without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Justin to begin today's session. Take it away, Justin.
All right, thank you, Sarah. First, I appreciate everyone taking the time during their busy day to join us to go over cyber liability and cybersecurity. And in today's webinar, I just want to address the coverages, claims that we see, some exclusions that you want to mention. Obviously, like you said, go through any questions. I try to keep these presentations to 20 to 25 minutes, just because I know as part of keeping my insurance license, I've got to hop on these continuing education classes, and usually they're about an hour, and once it gets past 30 minutes, I start losing my focus and my ability to listen. So I totally understand trying to make an insurance interesting. I think hopefully I can do it for 20 or 25 minutes, but I'll try to keep it in that time frame and take any questions after that. So just a little bit of background on TechRug. I used to be involved in the IT industry, and then back in 2004 got involved in insurance. And the name of our firm is McCormick and Rhyme Youth, and started working with local landscapers, bakeries, people's home, people's autos, things like that. And in 2006, was sitting down with an IT client, and he had said, "Wow, you really understand IT. Is that something that you specialize in?" And so I got to thinking, wow, maybe that's something with my background being in IT, and with insurance, I could blend the two together. So, under the McCormick and Rhyme Youth umbrella, we started working with, IT companies, and then it got to the point in 2011 where we started TechRug. And the reason that I started TechRug was because I found that small to medium-sized IT companies, for them to get really good coverage, it was costing them a fortune. So at that time, we went and interviewed some carriers and started working with a carrier in 2011, where they agreed to give our clients special pricing, special coverages, and endorsements. And then in 2015, we got to the point where, we had 700 or 800 MSPs, cloud service providers, software development companies, telecommunication service providers, and we created our own policy form for them. So we actually hired coverage attorneys, and we wrote our own policy language. We, endorsed the policy. We, invoice the policy. We do everything now that a regular or a normal quote unquote insurance company would do. We just don't finance the claim. And, today we, represent just over 1,100 IT and cyber clients. And the typical client will range from, a couple 100,000. We've got a couple 100 million, but I would say a majority of the IT clients that we work with are about $1 million to $10 million. So just a little bit of background on me and TechRug and what we do, and, kind of get started with this. So what is, cyber liability and cybersecurity insurance? So when you look online, you'll find a lot of, definitions and a lot of references to, electronic activities, which, is a majority of the claims and where we see, activities happen. But, with that being said, it's not the only. There is electronic and there's non-electronic data. So you have to be, careful not just to focus on the electronic data. And traditional business and E&O policies have exclusions. Now, more and more carriers are starting to add endorsements to cover, some sublimited, so 10, 20, 30, 40, $50,000 of some cyber liability or cybersecurity coverage. But it's still not enough, as you'll see in these future slides, with the claims and the amount that gets paid out. But you need a policy, and you want to make sure that you've got a cyber liability and cybersecurity policy that not only covers your electronic activities, which would be, obviously collecting client data and stuff like that, but also the non-electronic data. And what do I mean by that? Here's a graph or a little pie chart from the 2016 Net Diligence Cyber Claims Study. So this study just gathers information from insurance carriers. They report claims, how much was paid out, and then Net Diligence puts this cyber claims study together and publishes it every year. So if you take a look at it, why I was focusing on the non-electronic is that you see hackers, malware, and viruses represent about 44% of the claims. But a staff mistake, a rogue employee, paper records, those would be all, non-electronic, right? I mean, we've had situations where not only our MSPs or our IT clients, but also their clients, they've shared us where employees' errors have led to like HIPAA violations that have included, I don't know, disclosing information in phone messages, discussing treatments or procedures where they were overheard. We've had somebody that was labeling files in a way that disclosed a diagnosis, inadvertently faxing patient information to the wrong person. So those are some areas where we see employee errors. And, although those aren't electronic, they're non-electronic, they're still HIPAA violations. They're still something that needs to be reported. And if you don't have a cyber liability or cybersecurity policy to cover those sorts of situations, then you could be in trouble. We also had an MSP, I don't know, it was maybe 2 years ago, that he did not wipe a server when he took it out of a healthcare provider's office and put the server in a storage unit. And sure enough, the storage unit got broken into, right? And so, they had to notify, the patients. There were also, I believe, even some paper records in there. So that was a situation where that led to a non-electronic cyber liability claim. So making sure that you got a policy that covers both is extremely important. Who needs cyber liability? So I get that question all the time, and my answer is honestly everybody. I mean, any company that would handle, maintain, process personally identifiable or protected health information is going to want to make sure that they've got a policy in place. So, obviously that's all of our MSPs, but it's, our MSPs clients. I mean, making sure that, healthcare providers, lawyers, nonprofits, accountants, doctors. I mean, people are going to have, and I'll get to a future slide here, but, you're going to have email addresses. There's 47 or 48 states now that have privacy laws on the books. And if information is disclosed, there's a notification process that has to take place, right? I mean, we at TechRug, have taken this so seriously that we've actually created a cyber data breach endorsement for our policy holders to have, where they can extend cyber data breach coverage to their clients. We give them a checklist, and as long as their clients, comply with that checklist, then they can get access to, this type of insurance. So you need the coverage as an MSP. You need to make sure that you've got strong E&O coverage, as well as first and third party cyber liability, as well as, even making sure that you've got some crime coverage. And your clients, I mean, each of your clients needs to make sure that they've got, a cyber liability policy in place to cover, the theft or disclosure of PII or PHI. So especially with you guys with the strong E&O, you want to make sure that you got, client data loss, and breach of contract in there. I was actually just reading an article when I was putting this together over the weekend that said that cyber claims in the next 10 years will equal what property and casualty claims have paid out in the last 30 years in the insurance industry. So, that's something that, I don't know, I thought was staggering that in a third of the time, we're going to have as many cyber claims dollar-wise paid out that we will in property and casualty in the last 30 years. So here's this pie chart again, and I just wanted to show you, you as the MSP or the IT company, I mean, these are where all of your exposures are: a rogue employee, a staff mistake, a lost or stolen laptop, malware, hacks. This is why you carry cyber liability E&O insurance. But again, reminding your clients, I mean, if you were to take this pie chart and take away the hackers, malware, viruses, and system glitch, your clients still have a 50% chance of turning in a claim. So, making sure, educating them to make sure that they have their own cyber liability insurance is extremely important. Because the threats keep on coming. I mean, again, in some future slides here, I'll show you, that the number of data breaches that are occurring in 2017 have already outpaced 2016. These are what I call my not so fun facts, right? So, like I just referenced, in 2017, we've already witnessed more claims in 2016. 60% of small companies that suffer a cyber attack go out of business in 6 months. This has happened. One was an MSP client of ours, and the other one was a client that called me. The client that wasn't a client of ours that came to us, he was on the West Coast, and he did not carry E&O insurance, and his client had a breach and sued him, and he was not able to financially, keep up with the legal bills and the notification, so he had to file bankruptcy, and it forced him to close. So he had called us about, taking out. He had, I think, filed like bankruptcy and started up a new company, and was wanting now to secure E&O coverage because I guess it was a lesson learned, right? But we had another client in the South that he, I would say, what was it, maybe 85% of his business was hardware sales, and he only did about 10 to 15% of managed services. So every year we'd bring it up like, hey, you need E&O, you need E&O. With the cyber liability, and he just said, I just don't feel like my exposures, is there. Down here we do things a little bit different. It's over a handshake, all this sort of stuff. And sure enough, one of his clients had, gotten some malware, and they were shut down, and they sued him. And so, he, was in big trouble. He wasn't able to keep up with, with the cost of the notification. With, I think there was even forensics that was involved that had to investigate why the breach occurred. So it's amazing, but again, 60%, 6 out of 10 clients that suffer a cyber attack in 6 months are out of business. 43% of cyber attacks, are targeted to small business. Probably a lot of people on this phone call. Again, MSPs, are being targeted more and more frequently, and it's because of the data that they maintain. A lot of our clients and a lot of clients, MSPs in general, are working with healthcare and professional services clients. And guess what? Healthcare and professional services clients are the 2 most breached sectors, according to that Net Diligence cyber claim study. So we have our MSPs that might be lower in revenue that are requesting, to carry higher limits just to protect themselves, against, the threat of cyber attacks, not only to their systems, but to their client systems. And, just the cost of not only notification, but legal expenses, it keeps rising. That, maybe $1 million isn't good enough for a lot of people anymore. This 4th bullet point, many small businesses feel like they don't store sensitive data. We get that a lot from our MSPs clients where, they'll say that they don't, feel like that they store sensitive data. But, in actuality, according to this report, that I think it surveyed 102 companies that had answered that they didn't feel like they stored sensitive data. 68% actually stored email addresses, 64% phone numbers, and 54% had, billing addresses. So, I know a lot of clients don't, they think, oh, listen, my MSP or my IT, client or my IT company, handles this all for me. I don't really need a cyber liability policy. We know that you guys have this information, but again, so do your clients, which goes back to my earlier slide that, you've got to make sure you've got a strong cyber E&O policy. And again, your clients have to make sure that they've got a strong cyber liability policy for their own mistakes. And then the last point here I wanted to show was the average breach cost. When I ask some of our clients, what do you think the average cost is, right? And most of them answer, $1 million to $2 million. So, I guess according to them that the average breach isn't, doesn't cost as much as they thought, right? But, if you've got multiple clients, if you're in, if your clients are in the healthcare sector or in the professional services sector, those breaches tend to cost a lot more than the $665,000. So I just want to share some of these not so fun facts, as I like to call them. Some coverages that you want to pay attention to if you're going to look for cyber liability, or even if you have one right now. The first one is going to be contingent bodily injury and property damage. A lot of these E&O policies have exclusions for bodily injury and property damage. And in the definition of the policy, bodily injury usually means infliction of emotional distress. If you take the Ashley Madison lawsuit, the 4 most common types of lawsuits that were filed against them in that breach was negligence, breach of implied contract, infliction of emotional distress, and violations of Stored Communications Act. And the infliction of emotional distress was, a lot of those lawsuits, I think they're still going on, but, when I was reading it, were really successful because people were extorted, and some people even unfortunately committed suicide, right? So, making sure that you've got a policy that doesn't have an exclusion for emotional distress as it relates to privacy claims is extremely important. Also, recently with the Equifax breach, there are lawyers now that are going to the court, and they're asking them to start awarding emotional distress damages, much like they do for medical malpractice and pollution cases, because, they were given the analogy that, the fear caused that a criminal might take out like a mortgage or a line of credit in their name, or that they could be denied a loan because of their credit. So, those, I think lawyers are positioning themselves to set up those infliction of emotional distress claims against Equifax. And if you have that exclusion on your policy, and a claim comes in, it's probably going to be denied by the carrier when they point to that exclusion. So this is something that you want to pay attention to. The next one, network security. I mean, between this and client data loss, that's 95% of the claims that we see. So, since you're in charge of protecting people's networks, you want to make sure that you've got, this network security coverage, which covers the unauthorized access into your system or your client system, and it also covers, transmission of a virus. We have a claim going on right now for a client in Florida where their client had gotten social engineered, and they had, I think, wired five separate wire transfers that totaled $350,000, and they're coming back to our MSP and saying, hey, listen, you let this email through, and because of that, we got tricked into, sending out these wires, and we want to be compensated. Now, I don't think that they'll get very far because the client had a contract that has a best practices that says, hey, listen, we're going to try to, keep out as many bad emails as we can, but we can't guarantee you that we're going to keep out 100% of these, right? But again, it's the cost of the defense and defending yourself that really adds up. You also want to make sure that not only obviously your network's covered, but that your third-party provider, your cloud service providers. I think it was last summer, there was an RMM provider that had a breach, and all of a sudden, it was a Sunday. I remember getting inundated with emails saying, hey, listen, we've got to notify our people because of this breach. So if you're handing your information over to a third party and your policy doesn't cover that, you got to be careful because, oftentimes that's an example where your negligence doesn't lead to a claim, but it happens to happen to a third party. But because you are collecting the information, you are to notify your clients. And a lot of times too, when I've read contracts from these third party providers, they limit their liability. So it might be to, I don't know, $1,000 or 2 months of fees paid. Well, if you have a contract in place with your client, that says that, hey, we'll cover, up to 10 months of fees, and your third party vendor is only covering up to 2 months of fees, you're now on the hook for that 8 months difference. If you've got 50 or 60 clients that you got to make that up with, that's going to add up. So, making sure that you've got coverage for third party vendors, if you give them your data, is extremely important. Exclusion wise, one of the big ones that you want to pay attention to is a lot of these carriers will put in that 100% or all security related patches and products need to be updated and secured. So I don't know. I always tell our clients, you live in a world of 1 to 99%. It's not always or never, right? So, we understand that there's Patch Tuesday and your whitelisting, right? But I've read, seen claims, not by us, but read about them where, carriers have denied claims because they said that, Norton, for example, came out with 1.2 over the weekend. You had your client on 1.1. And because of that, we're not going to pay the claim. I also seen where they say, hey, we want you to audit your third party vendors to make sure that, that they've got adequate security measures in place. Well, I mean, if you're dealing with Microsoft or, Amazon or one of these third party vendors that's huge, I mean, you got to run your business. You don't have time to go around and audit. And secondly, these third party vendors aren't going to let you in. So, making sure that, that there's some leeway there. I know, on our policy, it says that you have to do it as soon as reasonably possible, but you want to try and stay away from 100% or all or never because, again, we live in a world where it's like 1 to 99%. The third coverage that you want to pay attention to is the privacy liability. I mean, it's just the theft or disclosure of PII or PHI. These bring your own devices, BYODs, are leading to a lot of claims. I saw a report that said that 30% of people connect now to company networks via unsecured, free, or public Wi-Fi. So, it's leading to disclosure of PHI and PII. Another one that we see a lot of in this is lost and stolen laptops. Where we'll have get cars that get broken into, or they left a laptop in a rental car, and those are unencrypted. They have sensitive data. That's a reportable offense. Now, next thing you know, you have to report this, and if you're notifying 1,000 people at $30-$40, you're in a $30,000 or $40,000 claim. When you're looking at this exclusion, you want to make sure a lot of these carriers will make it so that that the devices have to be encrypted, and it's a slippery slope because encryption's great, right? But again, making sure that every single device is encrypted. If somebody gets a new device and you can't get out to them that week, and they happen to have some sort of, theft or disclosure of PHI or PII, and that's not encrypted, they're going to just point to that exclusion and deny the claim. So, you just want to be careful of that encryption exclusion under the privacy liability insurance agreement. Media liability is another one. This is, it's something that used to be covered on your business insurance, where it would be for copyright, trademark, libel, slander, defamation. Those are probably the most common types of lawsuits. But more and more carriers, when they were offering these $500 business policies, they didn't, imagine that social media and all that would be so big that they were all of a sudden, getting into these libel, slander, defamation lawsuits. And so the carriers started carving back the coverage when it came to personal and advertising injury, and they were punting it over to the cyber carriers. So, again, you want to make sure that you've got that cyber policy to pick up the media liability. I know that we had one of our MSPs. It was kind of a weird situation, but he had, I think it was a $20,000 or $30,000 a month account, and he had won this account from another MSP. And when he was sitting down with the CFO, he was pointing over some things that I don't know that if they were necessarily wrong, but things that they would do different. And not only was he doing that, but the client was going to save money. So when the CFO called up the other MSP to fire him, he basically had said, "Hey, listen, we're going with not only a cheaper option, but you just weren't doing these certain things right. So we're going to head down the path with someone else." A couple weeks later, our MSP got a lawsuit in the mail and certified letter. And it was for libel, slander, defamation. Now, once we turned it in, and the other MSP found out that there was an insurance company behind it, they dropped the claim because it was baseless, right? But that was a situation where I don't know, had he not had the media liability insuring agreement, right? Maybe the other client had deeper pockets than our MSP, and they would have pushed forward with it. I did see a claim. We had one that was kind of weird, where an employee of an MSP had sent an email with some negative comments about a service provider or about a provider, third-party provider, and the email had gotten forwarded to others, and the email actually made it back to that third-party provider, and that third-party provider had sued him for defamation. So that was kind of one that was outside of the box. Exclusion-wise, making sure that you have coverage for not only the online media and what you're doing online, but making sure offline media. I know, with one of our clients, this was, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years ago, they had put out advertisements on some marketing material, and they didn't have permission from the vendor to do so. And the vendor came at them for damages for unauthorized use of advertising material. So, that happened to be, again, a cyber liability claim. Most people wouldn't think of that, but that would have been an offline media claim. Privacy notification costs. So this is pretty self-explanatory. I mean, if there's a breach, you have to notify people according to the laws on the books in the 47, 48 states. So, according to the Net Diligence Cyber Claims Study, there's records exposed are about 1,300. The cost to do so is about $40. So just in notification costs, you're going to be looking at $53,000 to notify people and provide credit monitoring. So, as you can see, if one of these dominoes falls, as I'll go through a couple more of these slides, if there is some sort of unauthorized access, right, the next domino is you're going to have to notify. Then the next domino is you're going to have to, maybe potentially hire a forensic expert. The next domino is you're going to have to hire a PR firm. So when you start adding all these little claims up, with the various insuring agreements, they add up real quickly. Network security and privacy liability, regulatory coverage. So this is, for people that are have a lot of healthcare clients. I mean, HIPAA, it could be PCI, it could be Sarbanes-Oxley, it could be GLB. But if a governmental agency or regulatory body comes at you for the violation of a law protecting the confidentiality of PII, you've got to make sure that you got regulatory protection, because a standard E&O policy without the regulatory protection will not defend yourself. So you're making sure that you've got this regulatory fines and penalties coverage is absolutely necessary. Legal and forensics expenses. So Target probably comes to mind on this one. Due to the massive breach, it was ordered that they investigate, and they wanted to know why and how this happened, right? And they found out they came through an HVAC contractor, which we're seeing more of people going through, wireless printers and all that sort of stuff. But you have to have money set aside to hire a computer security expert or some sort of forensics company to determine, the cause or extent of the breach that occurred. If you don't have an insurance agreement for this that protects you against this, you're going to be on the hook for the cost yourself. Public relations and crisis management. So, if something does go wrong, you're going to have to. I think they say for every $1 of bad PR, you need to spend 10 in good PR, right? So, this is going to be the cost associated to hire a PR firm to mitigate the damage against your reputation. I just happened to look at, Equifax's stock price and Target stock price after this breach occurred. Now, these are big companies. They can sustain, in the long run, a financial hit for a short term. But a company like yourself probably can't do that. And you can see, Equifax stock went down considerably. Target, according to Forbes, the article in 2014, it dropped, 46%. So, they're in it for the long haul. But if something like this happens to you guys and you guys, happen to make the local news or the HIPAA wall of shame or the local paper, you better believe that your competition's going to point that out and try to take your clients, right? And, if your clients don't feel like that there's been changes made and, you're addressing, this breach the way you should be, they might leave you for the competitor. So, making sure that you got a good PR firm behind you to mitigate the damage is extremely important. The cost for damage and data program. So basically what that is that if you get hit and, with some sort of, unauthorized access hack and your data is corrupted, right? A lot of our clients want to make sure that to replace that data, that they've got funds to do so. So, it could also be, your client's information that might be in your care, custody, and control. You want to make sure that it's got coverage for if it's in a cloud service provider's network or a third-party network. But this insuring agreement will pay to reproduce that data due to some sort of unauthorized or hack. Network failure and business income. A lot of our businesses, are, as I told you, we've got clients that are a couple 100,000 and that are a couple 100 million. Well, if they're shut down for, more than a day, they want to know that they've got income to, help supplement, the time that they were down. So much like on your business insurance policy, you probably carry business interruption coverage in case there's a fire or a tornado. If you can't operate your business, after 24 or 72 hours, you want the insurance company to pay you lost wages. This is the exact same type of coverage, but it just has to do with a hack. So if there's a breach of your network and you can't operate your business, you want to make sure that you've got the business interruption coverage in there to compensate you for, the lost revenue while you're down. Cyber extortion. This is one of the last insurance agreements that you really need to pay attention to. Kind of 2014 was the year of the retail data breach. 2015 was the healthcare, but 2016 and even into 17 is cyber extortion. And so, I'm sure a lot of people on this call have had their clients that have gotten hit with some sort of ransomware or malware. I know we've had clients where to their clients it's deleted backups. So this ransomware is getting more sophisticated. And as I mentioned in a couple slides earlier, healthcare is the most affected, most breached sector. Why? Because, if the hackers get that information, they know that the ransom that they can get back is going to be, a lot, right? Because the lives of patients without access to some of this critical information could lead to, not such a good situation, right? So, cyber extortion, and if you got a lot of healthcare clients, making sure that you got coverage to pay for or eliminate credible threats due to a breach in security that might corrupt, damage, or destroy your computer system. Some exclusions that I always point out to my clients, and one of the ways to get around these, because some of these you just aren't going to get rid of. I mean, for the amount of money that you're going to pay for an E&O or for a cyber E&O policy, the carrier, isn't going to remove some of these exclusions. I mean, if you're going to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars, they might look at, getting rid of some of these. But, a way kind of from a risk management standpoint is, I know with our clients, we give them access to an MSA that mirrors our E&O policy form. So if there's an exclusion outside of their negligence that is important, then it's referenced in our MSA. So, guarantees, warranties, and promises. I get a lot of calls from MSPs that say, hey, listen, I want to be able to say that if you use our services, we guarantee or we promise that you won't get any sort of ransomware or malware. Absolutely not. Some people have asked us, hey, listen, can you, guarantee that, we'll keep them up and running, or that if they come with us, that we can say that we'll increase their productivity or help them with cost savings and stuff like that. On these cyber E&O policies, those are going to be excluded: guarantees, warranties, promises. Because if that wasn't the case, everyone would promise 100% uptime, and then if you only kept them up 99% of the time, and that company does $50 million, the carriers are going to be paying 1% for every client that was down during the year, which, that policy, if it was included, would be astronomical. Failure of mechanical and electrical or telecommunication infrastructure or services. We had a client that was in, and thank God they were using our MSA because this was referenced, but a lot of the MSAs will have, force majeure exclusions, which cover acts of God, but they don't address, these MSAs, electrical and mechanical failures. And ICE had taken down the power lines. It was a client in the Midwest. And when the power was re-engaged, the antivirus and the firewall didn't come up. And the office manager the next day had come in and happened to click on some malware, and they were shut down for a couple days. And they tried to come back at our client and say, hey, listen, because the firewall and the antivirus didn't come up, we're going to come at you. Well, again, not only was that in the contract, right, or the MSA, but you're not going to find a carrier that does that, because that is outside of your negligence. I mean, that's not something that, that you were willfully negligent in providing a service that led to a claim. So, that exclusion, you're just going to have to live with. But again, from a good risk management standpoint, is making sure that, you reference that in any sort of contract you're using for your clients. This last one, and again, I just kind of picked out three that were kind of important, is cyber terrorism. A lot of these policies will say that if you give your information to a third party, and that third party has a hack, and it's due to some sort of, political, religious, how they define terrorism reason, then if you don't have that, the cyber terrorism coverage, if there's an exclusion in there, and a lot of the policies have them, where if Amazon or Google or whoever has that data, if they decide to go after them because they voted a certain way and they damage or delete or destroy that data, there is going to be an exclusion for cyber terrorism that will prevent the policy from paying. So, making sure that, again, in a contract or something like that, that you're pointing out that you're not responsible for cyber terrorism is something that's going to be extremely important. These last two slides that I just wanted to touch upon were cyber crime insurance, because a lot of our clients and clients in general just get confused with what's the difference between cyber crime and cyber liability. So cyber liability is not cyber crime. Cyber crime, two of the most common that we see are unauthorized electronic funds transfer, right? Where it could be a computer program. If you download something or open up a PDF, these programmers now or these developers have set up programs where it searches for banking, routing, and account information, and they can actually take that information and do some sort of unauthorized electronic funds transfer out of your bank account. So, paying attention and carrying cyber crime insurance might be something that you might want to pay attention to, because if that happens to you, I've often asked my clients, please ask the bank what they would do. And the two answers that they report back to me is the bank will say to them, we've got enough practices and procedures in place to make sure that that doesn't happen. Or the other answer they give them is, you need a cyber crime policy. Cyber deception, this social engineering, it's hot. It's not only for your clients, but we've had in the last 6 months, 2 MSPs get hit with this. One client on the East Coast, he was down in the islands for spring break this past spring, and his office manager had gotten an email that looked like it came from him, and it was instructions to wire, I think it was $20,000 or $30,000 to this, particular vendor, right? And she thought it was legit and just wired the money. And there happened to be one character or one, letter was off, and they got duped, right? So, making sure that you guys are paying attention to the cyber deception and social engineering is extremely important. And then the last slide I wanted to show you here was basically the third-party coverage. So, your techs and your employees have unprecedented access to banking, routing, account information of your clients. So if they steal from your clients, what precautions or what do you have in place, to protect that client? So, anyone that maybe if you get your house cleaned or something like that, if there's a maid service, they'll often advertise, that we're bonded and insured, right? So what they're saying is that when they're bonded is if, we steal the Rolex or the wedding ring or something like that, that, we have insurance that will cover that. And then what they don't tell you is there's a conviction clause in there, which basically says that they have to be convicted and admit to it. So a lot of those bonds, aren't really worth the paper that they're written on. But you guys need to make sure, that if there is the theft of information from your clients, that you have an insurance policy, in there in place to protect yourself, to compensate, that client for any losses that they may have sustained. Sarah, with that being said, I guess I'll turn it over for questions here. I just wanted to try to keep this short, sweet. I know I went over my 20 to 25 minutes, so I apologize. But hopefully people on the call found some of this information interesting.
Great. Thanks, Justin. We do have a few questions in the question panel. I don't know if you can see them there. There was one question about if the webinar is being recorded, and the webinar is being recorded, and we'll send that out to everyone within 24 hours or so. We'll be sure to get that out to you.
I apologize. I hope everyone could hear me. I saw one guy said that he couldn't hear me, so I hope everyone could hear me. Sarah, do you want me to just read off these questions?
Sure, you can read them.
Okay. Let me see here. My box is not that big. Will you be sending out a recording and slide deck? Sarah, I think you have the slide deck.
Yes.
Okay. How can we get a copy of your MSA to see if it addresses topics? Yeah, our MSA is actually for our clients. So we had our coverage attorneys and a law firm, go through our E&O policy and an MSA and kind of merge the two together. So I can only speak, our MSA is only available for TechRec clients. It's not something that's available to non-TechRec clients. So I apologize for that. I think Dave said, how do we contact Justin? Sarah, I believe you have my information.
Yep, we can. In the follow-up email that I'll send with the recording, I'll also include Justin's contact information.
And questions. I think that's it, unless someone wants to type something in or ask it out loud. I'd be more than happy to go over anything that we reviewed, or if someone has questions about situations that occurred, would something be covered, feel free to ask. I think we might be okay, Sarah.
All right. I think that's all the questions we had then. Justin, I want to thank you again. Great presentation. I hope this was very useful to the audience. We did a little different type of webinar today, where it wasn't very, product focus, is more of a way to help MSPs. So I hope everyone enjoyed it, and I wish everyone a great day.